Hello everyone and welcome to Soundcart Live. Great to see all of you here, and I'm pretty stoked to talk about today's topic of my top 10 tips for better wireless on a film set. And the good news is it doesn't require you to change brands. It doesn't require you to use one piece of gear versus the next or any of that stuff. It really comes down to the application of what we do as production sound mixers on set. So that's what we're going to be covering today. I'm really excited. Everyone is here. So we'll go ahead and get started right after this message. And thanks for joining Soundcart Live. The key sounding lav is 10% placement and 90% process.
Typically, I'll do a script breakdown on my iPad. Ingenuity and flexibility really are the keys here because we have the same goal. Capturing the performance.
It is this process here that inspired us to create Wire Like the Pros, a masterclass for students and professionals who have the desire to excel and go beyond just the wiring technique and tools.
Let's talk about working with the actors.
So I invite you to come over now and enroll into Wire Like the Pros at mwsound.net. And hello everyone, and thank you again for joining me today for this live stream of Soundcart Live. I'm really just excited to be here and talk about this. This is one of my favorite topics. And I'm one of these mixers who's absolutely obsessed with RF. I love RF. I love everything about it. The electromagnetic wave is a beautiful thing, and I'm constantly on the search for trying to figure out how to best optimize my wireless on a film set. And a lot of that comes down to the choices that I make when working. And I thought, well, why not start the conversation by getting a top 10 tips for better wireless on a film set. And these are things that I follow and that I do that really have greatly improved the results that I get. You know, the thing about RF and wireless is it's a lifelong learning process, and there really is no shortcuts. So learning the fundamentals of RF and how electromagnetic waves propagate in space at 186,000 miles per second at the speed of light, and the patterns in which they do so, and how this beautiful magic works is so important to the results that we get working on a sound card. And one of the really nice things about what we do as production mixers is we get to put ourselves into these environments that change constantly. So Monday we might be at this location, Tuesday we're at this location, and we might be dealing with this wardrobe or this specific situation, or our range requirement could be drastic. One day you might be sitting doing a simple sit-down interview. The next day you might be chasing a vehicle down the road or trying to do something very long range. And all of these things and situations are choices that we can make to support these type of things. So that's the kind of stuff we're going to talk about today. So let's go ahead and get right into it of the top 10 list here. And I almost skipped ahead here, but don't read ahead just because I didn't have it right. So top 10 tips for better wireless on set. So let's go ahead and get started right with number 10, which is when it comes to excellent reception, height is might. So you may have heard this before, especially for those of you who have been working in wireless for a while. This term height is might. So why is height might? Like, what is really the difference of, say, getting my receive antennas higher versus lower? What are the specific advantages? So there are two types of obstacles, let's say, when wireless propagates throughout the air. So let's say you have a transmitter on the talent, and then that transmitter has a quarter wave whip which is propagating in a omnidirectional pattern. Let's say it's vertically polarized, and it's filling the space. So in that space, some of those elements, such as a metal trailer or something, is a conductor. And what a conductor does is it reflects RF. And then some of those elements are absorption elements. So what are some examples of absorption elements? Well, bushes and trees and bodies, especially bodies. Like on film sets, what are we filming a lot? Well, people are a huge part of what we create and see in front of the camera. And bodies are big absorbers. So height is simply a way to get over these elements. So being higher, your antenna is more effective because it is less likely to be interfered by these elements. A practical example of this is a cell phone tower. As you know, as you drive around your neighborhood or city, you'll notice that these things are 300, 250 feet in the air. And the reason is because less obstacles and easier to reach all the characters. So remember, height is might. So getting those antennas up a little higher will make a difference. So that's number 10. That's a fun one. I really like that one. So let's go right here back to, there we go. Gotta get in. All right, so number 9, maximize the distance between transmitters and receiver antennas, transmitter antennas and receiver antennas in the sound bag. So maximize the distance between the transmitter antennas and receiver antennas in the sound bag. Now you might be saying to me, Michael, it's a sound bag. And that's true. And we have this limited space here. But the truth is that the closer that your camera hop or IFB transmitters are to your receiver antennas, the less likely your receiver antennas are going to be able to hear what they are trying to hear, which let's say is the talent on set. So these receiver antennas here are trying to receive something that by the time it reaches it is at maybe a 1/1,000,000th of a watt, a 1/10 millionth of a watt, meaning the power is extremely low by the time it reaches your receiver. So having that IFB camera hop on the bag, being close, that antenna to your receive antenna, is like someone standing next to you and screaming into your ear while someone across the room is trying to have a normal conversation. It makes it difficult for it to hear. And if it really is exasperated, then it can overload the front end of your receiver. So we could write a book about how to separate the transmitter antennas and receiver antennas in the back, because obviously we want to be a compact space. But the good news is just a little bit of distance goes a long way. And elevation in this point can be our friend. So there are some antennas I'll throw out there that you don't see a lot. One you can actually put into your harness, which is called a coaxial half-wave dipole. And you can make this with an RG176 or a thin cable. I'll put a link on the video below. With an existing cable, and literally have a half-wave dipole in your harness above where your receiver antennas are in your bag. The other things we can do are get, obviously, the antennas out of the bag for the receivers. But number 9, the key point here is maximize that distance and try to separate those as much as possible, which, as you probably know, and most of you who are on this channel work in sound or professionals in sound, that's a hard thing. That's an easy thing to say, a harder thing to accomplish. But with some creativity and ingenuity, just a little bit of difference can go a long way. So I like that one. So let's move right to the next one here, which I think is number 8. Minimize body absorption. It's an electromagnetic sponge. Minimize body absorption. So, what do we mean by that? Well, you probably know and have heard the human body's 70% water. We are an electromagnetic sponge. So if you take a quarter wave whip and you put it next to the body, the amount of power coming out of that transmitter is greatly absorbed by your body. So simply by that antenna touching the skin or just being close to the body is going to absorb a lot of the signal, which is then going to obviously decrease range. So our friend Turi at Viviana has an amazing, beautiful product that I'm sure you've seen called the RF Saver, which is it's almost like a straw type. I think of a straw because I used to use straws before this. I don't know what the material is. It's like a flexible rubber that goes over the quarter wave whip, which I have. It's beautiful. That can help with body absorption, keeping it from touching the skin. Also, you can cut straws. So before that existed, a lot of sound people would cut straws to length, and you could actually fit that to keep it from touching the body. And then also common sense type stuff. So if the talent is walking towards you, then obviously having the transmitter behind their back is not going to be the ideal situation. So simply by taking the transmitter and going to the side or even the front can make a huge difference. Oftentimes, ankles have a lot less body absorption. However, you also deal with the ground possibility, meaning that you're lower to the ground. Now, sometimes you hear, well, ground absorbs RF. Actually, that's not true. Ground is a conductor, so it bounces RF. However, being lower to the ground means more obstructions, more absorption. It is harder to propagate, but it is better for body absorption. So there's always a balance of what is good and is not, but we always want to be thinking about avoiding body absorption. I love this stuff. This is like my favorite thing. So, all right, so here we go. Moving on to the next one, number 7. Match the polarization on our transmitter and receiver antenna. So, most of you probably are familiar with an electromagnetic wave, which has an electric signal polarized in one direction and then 90 degrees. The other direction is the magnetic signal, which is what makes the electromagnetic signal. So one is going like this, while the other is going like this. So an antenna can be polarized vertically, horizontally, or even at a 45-degree angle, like you would see in, like, say, a helical type propagation. But most of the antennas that we're using are either going to be horizontal or vertical. So just know that to get the best possible range and signal, we want to make sure that the polarization is matched. So if your antenna for your transmitter is vertical, you also want to make sure the polarization of your antenna, let's say you're using a dipole, an LPDA, maybe you're using a whip, is the same polarization. Because what happens is when the polarization is basically 90 degrees out of phase, the electric and then the magnetic signals are flipped. So that signal is greatly decreased as it reached the transmitter. So the golden rules: keep the polarization consistent. And by the way, I do have some helical antennas, and they're amazing. A lot of the times, and some of you might be thinking, hey, when I'm dealing with the talent, I can't always do a vertical polarized antenna. Well, you might have to do it horizontally. I want to say Ursa just came out with a new product that has a waist strap that is a horizontal polarization for the antenna because it makes sense for that particular type of strap. So we just want to make sure on the receive side that we're matching that, if we can. So let's move on to the next one. The super cool thing about this is that any one of these we could have a whole stream about. We could spend 2 hours on each one of these. So this is cool just to go over the big picture of all these tips. Number 6, only use the power output you need. What do I mean by that? Well, obviously our transmit antennas in the world of professional wireless are they're in milliwatts. I have an amateur radio license, a Part 97 amateur radio license as a technician, and the lowest power radio I have is a handheld HT 5 watts. So as a comparison, I think the highest power transmitter that I own as a Part 74 licensed wireless user is 250 milliwatts. So most of the transmitters that I use are either 10, 25, or 50, and some of them can do 50 or 100. And most of the power is changeable. That's the important note here. So if, for instance, to go back just a little bit, we talked about keeping the transmitter antenna and the receive antenna as far as possible in the bag. Well, one of the ways that we can help with that, especially if we can't physically separate, is we can lower the output power of the IFB or camera hub. Because if I'm within, say, 5, 10, 20 feet of a camera, I can transmit with one of my digital transmitters at 2 milliwatts, and have a usable, clean signal. And by doing that, it allows me to have a better receive sensitivity on my receiver in the back. So it actually improves, by lowering the power on one transmitter, it improves the reception on my back. So here's another example of that. And I'm going to show, I'm very guilty of doing a lot of bad things in the RF world as I have been learning and growing. And I remember distinctly, I was doing, in regards to power, use only the power that's needed. It was in the middle of the night. I was working on a show and we were doing car work. And we had log periodic dipole arrays, shark fins, LPDAs pointed right at this vehicle, maybe, 30 feet. And we had 4 talent in the car, plants, probably had 6 to 8 transmitters in there. Things went sideways. We started having RF power problems. And what we did is we just zapped everything to 1/4 watt. Now, if you haven't done that before, then A, you haven't been in the business very long, or B, you're not telling the truth. The problem with that is by taking these transmitters and superpowering them as the solution, it raises the noise floor. And any 3rd, 5th, 7th order intermods, any issues are exasperated. And that's what I mean about all of that RF makes it even harder and can make your range even worse. So you want to start with as little power as possible and then bump up to what you need. And you're going to do better on battery life when you do so. So let's go right on to the next one here as I get my quick keys together. Okay, number 6. So number 5, use the correct antenna for the application. Okay, what does that mean? Well, I think the most important thing here is, we can state the obvious. Okay, use the correct antenna for the application. So some examples are, if I'm doing a longer range situation, and I'm going to make it tricky here, and we're in a sound bag. because most of the time on these carts in the studios and on the sets, you're going to see LPDAs up in the air close to set within 100 foot every time. You're going to get great signal all day, providing you've got a good coordination and everything's proper on your system. But if you're in a bag and the talent's going to go 100 feet, 150 feet, 200 feet, if you have the ability to put some Omni bow ties on your bag, you absolutely should. The whip, quarter wave whip antennas require a ground plane to complete the full half wave necessary to receive that signal. Whereas an Omni antenna or even a dipole antenna, the conductor elements are split in two between the primary conductor, the two parasitic elements, or actually they're both radiators, excuse me, because parasitics change the actual the pickup quality of the antenna. They're not radiators. So the two radiators make the full half wave length. So there is no ground plane required. So that means the antennas can be elevated away from the bag, and I'm not relying on a ground plane antenna. I've done tests where I've actually measured what's called a VSWR score, voltage standing wave ratio, or standing wave ratio to quarter wave whip antennas with a proper ground plane. And my experience is that they are wildly inconsistent, meaning that depending upon what kind of body it's on, where it is, what it is, drastically changes how effective that antenna is. Because a standing wave in an antenna line basically pushes the signal back out. So basically what's happening is the signal you're trying to get in gets pushed back out. And the half wave antenna, dipole, Omni, log periodic dipole arrays are just three primary examples we see a lot in production sound, are much more efficient radiators. So that's an example of use the right antenna. Now you can also overpower. So if we're using, say, talent's 5 feet away, 10 feet, I don't know, what's like a standard ENG situation? I don't want to bust out my helicals, which are high gain antennas. And just to mention something really important, gain on an antenna is not power. It actually has the same amount of power as a theoretical isotropic antenna, which is like a sphere, basically. It doesn't exist in the real world. Maybe the closest thing could be an Omni or dipole, which is like a donut shape. So, which has a gain of, say, 0 or +1. But when you go to, say, an log periodic dipole array, the average gain of an antenna like that focuses that power, and all of that pickup power is then focused. So then that gives you better signal strength. That's a common misconception with antennas, that you're not adding gain. What you're doing is you're adding focus. So this is like, each one of these are awesome and a lot of fun because they open up a whole can of worms. The ARRL has an amazing book on antennas. If I can put that in the link below. I'm gonna have to watch this back to talk about all the things that I said I was going to put in the link below. Okay, let's keep moving forward here on our top 10 tips. This is this big picture stuff, man. There's so much we could go into and have a good time with. All right, so let's see here. Number 4, create a link budget. Calculate your loss and gain to unity. Okay, what does that mean? In layman's term, link budget. If you haven't heard of a link budget, it's a term used in a wireless system that basically compensates for any losses or gains in a system. The most common type of loss that we see in a system is the antenna loss. coaxial cable. So that loss can be measured in dB. And that is an electrical loss that shouldn't be confused with passive antenna gain. Because remember, we talked about focus power. This is loss. This is electrical loss in the signal strength. So let's say in the higher the frequency, the greater the loss. So in production sound, usually when I'm measuring a cable, well, I'll use a VNA, voltage network analyzer, and it tells me from 470 to 608 how much loss there is in the cable. And I'll see like a line that moves upward a little bit, because as we get closer to 608, it'll have a little more loss. So that helps me also identify if there's any issues with the cable. So I want to know how long my cables are, what is the loss of that cable, but also there are gains, okay? So if we are using a distro, let's say, like this sound bag right here, let me move my big head out of the way. You can't see, but it has a PSC distro, because I didn't want to keep unscrewing and screwing the delicate SNA connectors on an SL2. I wanted to use a proper distro with BNC cables. And I can measure the amount of gain with that particular distro. So if I have, say, plus 6 dB of gain coming out of that, going into, say, a omnidirectional antenna, and let's say we're fortunate enough that that omnidirectional is, say, like a WISI ABFA, just for example, that allows us to reduce the amount of gain that is being added to that distro for unity gain on the system. Some people configure passive gain of the antenna into the link budget. I don't. That's an area of debate for me. I like to be controversial, but I don't think it should be included in the link budget. Okay, so let's have some fun and keep rocking here into the next one. All right, so where are we? Number 3. Properly space those diversity antennas a half wavelength. Well, we're really fortunate that most of the receivers that we use, and we all know the big brands. I don't even need to name them. But if you're using a professional brand wireless, and there are so many great ones in the world, most of them have a diversity antenna, 2 antennas. And the purpose of that diversity antenna, which is simply 2 or more, by the way, is to negate multipath. Well, what is multipath? Multipath is when the propagated electromagnetic wave, say I'm using my frame, bounces and comes back and flips phase and then arrives at your single antenna out of phase. So basically, by being 180 degrees out of phase, they completely cancel each other out. So the idea is that those multipath, remember, multiple signals coming in, canceling out of phase, would not be out of phase a half wavelength apart, which is the distance. Each frequency has a wavelength measurement that you can do with a calculation, which I don't know off the top of my head, but there is one that you can measure and see how long. Now, you might think, well, and I've often thought, well, my receivers, my portable receivers, the antennas they're not even a quarter wave apart. Well, that's just a matter of design. I don't think you would be very happy if your portable receivers in the sound bag were 3.5 feet, long, just to get the full, I'd say a minimum of a quarter wave or half wave length apart. But using an antenna bar or something like that helps us work. A common mistake I think for newer sound people who are working with RF is that they can take a diversity pair and do zone coverage with it. Zone coverage and diversity pairs are not the same thing. Like I have an SPL 2208 WYSI 2-zone basically module on my sound cart, which allows me to work in multiple zones, but they work in diversity pairs. So you want to avoid putting your, one shark fin on one side of the room and one on the other, because it basically negates the whole purpose of a diversity setup. Doesn't mean it won't work, but it's not ideal. All right, so let's keep rocking and rolling here. And man, we're already at number 3. Let's see if I can actually get there. Okay, number 2. All right, so measure the signal to loss in the cables. Yep, we talked about that on the last one when we talked about creating a link budget. How do you do it? Well, you can use a vector network analyzer, which I called a voltage network analyzer incorrectly earlier. I just realized that. You can use a vector network analyzer, and these things, there is one called a Nano VNA. It's literally less than $100. It's an amazing tool, and I can measure the loss of my cables, the frequency, based on frequency, and see any problems in the cable. It's a beautiful thing. You want to know how much loss your cable is. Ideally, you're trying to get a unity gain on your link budget or on your antennas, because you don't want to undercook your receivers, meaning you don't want to give them less than they expect to see, and you don't want to overdrive them and, give them more than what they can handle. You want to find what's called a nominal operating level and by measuring the loss of the cables, you know how much gain you need to make up. And remember, just like the antennas, adding gain does not add power. It does not add signal strength, and it can work against you. So one thing we never want to do is say, oh, I'm just going to add plus 10 dB gain to my LPDAs because the talent's farther away. That will most likely overload the front end of your antennas, and they will work much less efficiently. It will work against you. The good news is a lot of distros. I know this SL2 right here has LEDs, and a lot of the more modern equipment will tell you when the front end is overloading, but you don't need that. What you need to know is what your link budget is, what the condition of your cables are, what your distro is. And then we can get into this whole thing about linearity, what it means, because sometimes I used to have systems where I would tie the receivers, I would loop through the receivers, which is a nice thing to be able to do, but it creates noise and a whole different stream. Could be done with that, of the reason why you want to use a distro. So now, number 1, maximize your signal to noise ratio. So why did I leave this as number 1? I mean, these I kind of jotted down. It really was just the first things that came to mind. But I thought about, okay, so this landed as number 1, maximize your signal to noise ratio. Because if you took all 9 tips that we went over, you'll see that most of them are designed to maximize the signal to noise ratio. But I think the most important thing here with maximizing the signal to noise is actually doing scans on set, most importantly. And, so if you're working in an environment where they're assigning you frequencies, always ask for double of what you need. Call them backups. You may or may not get them, but that's a good way to maximize signal to noise. So if you get one channel you're not so happy with, maybe the other one's a little better. If you're in charge of where your wireless is going, and you have that flexibility, which is pretty common on a film set, then you want to make sure that you're choosing the best possible channels with the highest signal to noise, meaning the most amount of separation between the noise floor and the signal, because all of these things, that will have more of an effect on your wireless than anything else that we do on a film set. And I wanted to mention that, all of the brands are good. At a certain price point, it does not matter what brand wireless that you use. What matters most is, for all of us, and for me especially, and for anyone working in sound as a sound mixer, is how well you have your system dialed in. Is it calibrated with a proper link budget? Are you using quality cables and equipment? Are you using a distro? Are you separating those transmit and receive antennas in a bag? Are you properly spacing your diversity setups? Are you dealing with body absorption? All of these things is what makes wireless work. So thank you guys so much for that. That's kind of like my top 10. And I just want to take a time here just to do some comments and questions. And just remember, there's no question. If you're new, there's no bad questions. If you're a veteran and you've got something to add or a tip, put it in the comments. Put it in the comments below. So this can be a resource, a video that helps people kind of navigate what really matters when it comes to improving wireless on set. So, okay, first comment here. Hello to everyone. Great topic as usual. Rocket Red Countdown it off. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you for the comment. Here we go. Hi, folks. Join in late, but happy to be here. I think some of these early comments. Great to see you, Norm. I think there's a question here. I use a fishing tank air hose over my antennas to prevent skin absorption. Super soft, flexible, and very inexpensive. That's great, Norm. Thank you for sharing that. There's another great technique, or tool to be able to, keep those antennas from coming in contact with the body. Because just a little bit of space goes a long way. Thank you so much for the tip. Michael, technologies like SD's gain forward are intriguing. Do you think we're close to the point when we'll be able to digitally transmit the entire dynamic range of a mic to a 32-bit float track? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's my experience, Norm, that, a solid, what I'm doing every day of the week is 48K, 24-bit, and, the quality of that is absolutely amazing. And I think the importance of gain staging is uber important from the production mix that's delivered to the editorial with their timelines to deliver rough cuts and everything they have to do. The last thing they want to be doing is fixing 32-bit audio that wasn't properly gain staged. I think a lot of the hype around this 32-bit record and transmission is all marketing a hoopla. However, there's not a drawback. What I mean by that is the file sizes are still very small. And if someone says, hey, we want 32-bit, I'm happy to do it. But as far as the wireless technology is concerned, that's probably a great question for SD, and sound devices is who they're talking about, just in case someone doesn't know. They would probably be a great source to answer that question. Thank you, Norm, so much for putting it up there. It's really something to think about. When working close to transmitters with minimal cable loss, I find patting down gain more than useful than adding gain. Yeah, Norm, I'm so glad you brought that up because I find myself doing the same thing, and I can relate to that. And I've had other sound people and, say, hey, what gain should I put these antennas on? And to me, that question is kind of a loaded question because it depends. A lot of these active antennas can do negative gain. And sometimes by reducing the gain or signal of the in your link budget can actually improve your signal to noise by getting the antennas closer, the talent closer, and gaining down, you can actually start to mess with the signal to noise. So that's a really good comment, on what's possible. Zlatko, great to see you here. Thank you for the great lesson. Just to make list great, here's some points you can filter on your receiver. Also, using digital over analog is better for RF. Okay. Zlatko, thank you so much for your comment, and I appreciate it. And yes, the first part of that, using a filter is a huge tool in the bag. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's really powerful. By basically filtering the front end of your receivers and separating by frequency is another way to negate the necessity of have those transmitters and receivers close together. And now also the other side, also using digital over analog is better for RF. Something to think about is RF is RF, meaning that the same electromagnetic signal is traveling, whether it's analog or digital. What is different, however, is what is being sent. The digital wireless that we see today uses a 200 kilohertz deviation pattern, which is a constant 200 kilohertz as the limit. Now, there are smaller and thinner deviation patterns, meaning it uses less space on the spectrum, such as HDM mode, for instance. Electrosonics is a great example of that, to allow to fit more spacing in. Whereas an analog wireless modulates, it deviates. You could physically see it changing if you have a quality spec in. So it's not using all 200 kilohertz of the signal consistently. It modulates it using FM, frequency modulation. But as far as like one being better than the other, I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I have digital wireless for some stuff, and I have a analog wireless for others. So yeah, really great question. Thank you so much for being here, as always. And Norm says, you may have covered this at the beginning, and if you did, I can rewind. Any tips for setting up hop and comms along with receivers? Yeah. So yeah, Norm, a hop and comms along with receivers, spacing, frequency spacing, filters, like Zlatko mentioned, which was great, and managing your power levels, using the minimum amount of power levels. These are all really great comments, guys. I really appreciate it. And carrier to noise. There you go. Yeah. Another way to say signal to noise except it's carrier. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Norm. Curtis, so great to see you here. How are you, my friend? Thank you so much for saying hello. And we'll keep going through here. Norm says hey to Curtis. Here's a comment question from Lucas. Thank you very much, Michael, for this interesting and deep lesson. Always a pleasure to see professionals like you willing to spend their time and share their expertise with everyone. Lewis, it's my absolute pleasure. It is, honestly, I get so much, I get to learn. If I'm going to do a stream and hang out with a bunch of sound guys, I'm benefiting because it helps me keep my mind fresh and not get too comfortable. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. And this, I'd add block filters to this list. Yep. Everyone, that's a really good point with the antennas. And then it looks like we have one last comment here, and I apologize, I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, so I don't want to butcher it. But the comment is advantages and disadvantages of a helical tunnel. Okay, simple. So the helicals are commonly used for receiving, like, say, handheld mics on stages, because singers are constantly changing the polarization, and it uses a kind of a spiral pattern, which basically makes it immune to changes in polarization. So it can be very helpful. Also for a focused, it has a high gain or a high focused pickup pattern. So you can actually point it in the direction that you want and also invertly reject on the other side of that, which is nice. Disadvantages. Well, if you're trying to use a helical to cover, say, a wide range, where maybe a dipole or omnidirectional, which is 360, would be more beneficial. Obviously, it's not going to perform very well. Another disadvantage to a helical antenna is if what you're trying to transmit to is close, meaning that it can overload the front end, meaning it could be too much gain. So it's important to learn the polar patterns of the different antennas and see the plus and minuses. And another thing I like to do, great comment by the way, thank you so much, is try this stuff out. Like really spend time, just get your bag, get your cart out there and try different power levels. Just yesterday, I was seeing what's the minimum amount of IFB send I can do out of a digital transmitter out of a bag, and also the minimum amount of power that I need to do from a transmitter on Talent by putting it in my front left pocket because I wanted to add some body absorption for an exterior environment with whips. You know, so a lot of the times what we're really doing is not necessarily saying, oh, how far can I get 800 feet with this wireless or 400 with this one, is really how do you use the tools that you have to the best of their possibility, and what are the limits of those tools. So when you do go deploy these tools, you have no question about what you're going to be able to get or not get. So we got one more comment from Norm, and then I would say we're out of time. Thank you so much everyone for being here. My experience with the helical antennas is primary for IEM transmitters. Yeah, Norm, that's great. That's another great use. I forgot to mention that. So it's another, you'll see LPDAs for IEMs on side of stages a lot. You know, obviously guys, this is a transmit antenna, so it's not a diversity pair, it's a single. And you'll see helicals doing the same thing because they have a very focused beam width, right? Or pickup pattern. So thanks so much everyone for joining. I appreciate it for another SoundCart Live. And it was great to see everyone, and thank you for all your comments. And we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. And if you have some tips or something you want to share with me, I would love to hear it. Please put it in the comments below. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone real soon.